Hi, I'm Ron.
And I'm Don.
And this is the Ron and Don Show. Thanks for joining us today. We have a special guest here to talk with us, Beth Olson from SLM. Welcome, Beth.
Hi, good morning. Thank you for having me.
We're excited to have you because our topic today is grease interceptors.
Now, back about in the 1880s sometime, a guy out in California developed a tank that would allow fluids that are in suspension to settle out by gravity. And that's basically what a grease interceptor does. It uses gravity to let solids drop to the bottom and grease float to the top. And the funny thing is, they called it a grease trap or a trap. And fundamentally, nothing has changed. The science hasn't changed a bit in that gravity is how this whole thing works. We got all kinds of changes in how baffles are put in or how big or how many gallons. And we're going to talk today about what actually happens, what makes it so gravity can do its job. Now, we were talking just recently about a situation where I had a booster heater in a restaurant that for whatever reason at 4 o'clock in the morning it popped off on high pressure and dropped hundreds of gallons of 180-degree water right down the drain into the grease trap. And that raised the temperature of the grease trap such that it would not allow the grease to fall out of suspension and come up to the top. And a lot of grease was going through the city and they were finding us and all that kind of stuff. So we needed to cool off the grease trap, and one of the things was fix the booster heater. And we also put the ice drainage into the grease trap to help keep it cool all day. What are the things like that? Do you have problems with heat and other traps that you've dealt with around the country?
Yes, SLM has run into that as well. A lot of it depends on dishwasher temperatures. We've had several issues where we've had the city coming back to the restaurants and fining them for grease flowing through the system into the city lines and causing problems. It would, because of the high temperature coming out from the restaurant, flowing through the grease trap was not allowing time for the grease to cool and suspend and separate. So it flows directly through out of the restaurant lines into the city lines. By the time it hits the city lines, then it starts to cool. When it starts to cool, it starts to congeal, and that's when it starts to cause problems. So a lot of times when we have issues that come through from the inspectors of grease flowing through, one of the first things SLM wants to identify is what is your dishwasher temperature set at? Because there are regulations for that. And it depends what type of or size of grease trap that you have can regulate the temperature coming through from the dishwasher water.
Well, it's also frequently gone by gallons per minute flow rate through a grease trap or interceptor, and that dictates how big and even how many you have to have, and if it's in series or in parallel. And it's that time, there's just 50-degree water, the grease is going to separate out instantly. At 150-degree water, that grease is going to stay in suspension longer. Doesn't the turbulence flowing through the tank at too fast of a rate also help hold it in?
It actually can reverse it and push it through, yes, as well. It's gauged when a restaurant is first opened and started up. You have the plumbing inspector come in, and they're going to gauge what your gallon per minute, what size grease trap or interceptor is required for that facility based on seating capacity, what type of food you're processing, what equipment you have in the kitchen. So all of that is set in place and regulated, and they have a form that they actually fill out with checkoffs of how many this, how many that. It's a calculation. And at the end of the calculation dictates what size of grease trap or interceptor you're supposed to have, what your dishwater temp should be set at. So if you don't have these things set up properly or have the correct sizes put in, you can have issues down the road where the system itself that's installed cannot keep up with what the restaurant is producing and what's coming through.
So the speed at which the water is going through, or the fluids are going through the grease trap, the temperature of the water, both affect how quickly they separate.
Yes.
And then we've got soaps and detergents and cleaning things, basically surfactants, that will chemically hold the grease in suspension. So if we overuse our chemicals.
And the type of chemicals that are used, that causes issues as well. There is When the terminology in a grease trap interceptor is fog, which is fat soils grease, that's an industry term. In the center is your wastewater, gray water, and all debris, food particles, anything heavy with weights to fall to the bottom. So that's where your gravity is coming into play in the separation. When you've got chemicals that are coming into it, it's adhering to the fat soils and the grease, and that's what's rising to the top of the tank. That can also go into another step where it's not only affecting the process, the proper flow of the tank, it also affects testings that the municipalities do on the contents of the grease traps and interceptors. So if you are using harsh chemicals or a lot of chemical, when you're getting tested, that's a BOD, which is a biochemical oxygen demand. They have levels set in every municipality of what regulates where you're supposed to be at. If you're over, you're going to get cited and fined. So we find all natural products are the best to use generally, watching that you're trying not to just dump it down the drains, cleaning it up properly. That helps when it gets into the trap cycle to keep the flow proper and keep it working.
So when you get a case of floor cleaning solution and that just came off the truck and the corner's broken and one of the leaking, you just don't set it in the mop sink to drain away to go into the grease trap to really increase that surfactant level, because it'll float through even the grease that's separated out in the grease trap. It'll resuspend it and take it out to the city.
Yes, most people don't realize how much of what the staff inside the kitchen can do to negatively impact the proper operation of a grease trap and an interceptor. It absolutely affects every operation of that and where it's going to go. If you have the high temperatures, if you have overabundance of chemicals, the problem is if you're not allowing the grease trap or interceptor to do its job and it's flowing through onto the city side of the plumbing, you're going to start to have problems and it's going to come back to the restaurant.
Well, let's talk a little bit. You talked about BODs. A lot of times, it also negatively impacts the sewage treatment plant because they're running lots of blowers and fans to get oxygen into the effluent that they're getting, which is both grease-laden and septic side, to get the microbiology going in that water and break it down so it can be discharged. If they have to run the fans even more because it has more high BODs, that costs them money for electricity. That's why they're coming back to find the restaurant, because the high BODs, we got to run our fans and we got to hold that stuff longer in our tanks till it has a chance to break down. Yes. And the surfactants particularly will cause problems, and the grease that flows through also encapsulates particles of food or whatever, and the grease has to break down enough or separate enough so that then the activity, the biology can get in there and break down the food, and then they can do something with that wastewater. So it's, this whole thing is vicious cycle. So it's temperature, it's flow rate, and it's pretty much surfactants or cleaning chemicals can really mess you up if they're out of balance. Now, let's say that we have added a bunch to the kitchen. We added another cook line, and we're putting more through the grease trap. Do you guys install additional grease traps?
SLM also has a full service facilities maintenance department, which can handle everything from HVAC facilities, all types of repairs. We do specialize on the grease side because we've been doing it for many, many years on any type of repairs. New installations with new stores, replacements, adding additional, what you're citing there. If you're adding more, remember when the plumbing inspector's doing his calculations, he's going on what's existing and going in. If you're adding, there's a new calculation. So SLM has run into several areas where the inspector's going out and kind of recalculating. Plumbing code changes, it updates. And you're either going to be grandfathered in, if you're lucky enough. Unfortunately, there's the side where we just don't feel the facilities have the capacity that we need to stop the flow coming and causing problems on our city side. So we are now going to update the code and require you to install an additional interceptor tank.
How common is that?
I would not say it's overly common. I've probably in the last 12 years, I have run into a handful of areas that have required that. However, you'll find it when sometimes they're going to come back to you if you cannot get your BOD levels under control and you're constantly causing an issue where they're constantly getting that flow through onto their city side causing problems. Their fix for that is, well, if we make them put in an additional tank, which is going to be the second barrier, so maybe that's going to stop it from coming through to us. So individual requirements will be related to what's going on with a specific restaurant.
Let's briefly talk about different kinds of tanks. And just for an example, in one part of the country, you're required to have a grease interceptor tank right next to a dish machine. If it's a 180-degree high-temp dish machine, let's be honest, all you'll get in there is some sediment in there. The grease is going to flow through because it's just too hot. Yes. You'll never collect any grease, but that's the code. You got the tank. You got to maintain it. It does no value other than it's just got water moving through, and it may slow or cause the temperature to cool down a tad. So by the time it gets to the second tank outside, it may be a little more effective, but that's about the only value it has. But there are different kinds of interceptors with baffles, and there's some that are automated processing ones that you'll never see in a restaurant, but you will see ones that have a rotating drum. And again, if that's next to a dish machine, a high temperature dish machine, it'll catch grease at night, but it won't catch it during the day because of all the hot water going through it. And there are municipalities that require that as opposed to a standard baffled units. Yes. What's your experience with the automated versus the static gravity units? The
automated, if it is mandated by a certain municipality, we're required to use it. The restaurants require it's a requirement. Something that has always fascinated me with this industry is nothing is the same. Nothing. And I believe one of the main reasons why I really enjoy it so much is because every single day I'm learning something new. There's some new setup where I literally sit there and I'm looking at pictures. I have grease traps suspended from ceilings in parking garages. I have grease traps, just like you're saying, right next to the dishwasher, and it's flowing right, that's the first flow through, where you're getting all that hot water. So we know it's not going to operate properly, but that's what they were told to do when the plans were set up. I'm sure you have run into some of these situations as well.
I've seen them in malls, literally hanging from ceilings.
Yes, absolutely. They're everywhere.
It's unbelievable.
Well, I really appreciate your insight. Anything else that we should learn on all this?
I think we've covered a lot, really.
I think we have.
Yeah,
That's great.
we have.
Well, Beth, thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me.
Appreciate SLM being a part of this. It's
Thank
a
you.
great discussion, and we thank you for being here today.
Thank you.
I'm Ron.
I'm Don.
And I'm Beth with SLM.
This is the Ron and Don Show. Thanks for joining us today.
Please subscribe.